West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Well, good evening once again. Day 154 of the Biden administration. The Democrats have been blocked in the U.S. Senate. Today, they lost a vote that would have allowed just the discussion of voting rights. All 50 Democratic senators voted in favor of advancing the For the People Act, including West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin, whose support wasn't secured until late this afternoon, but it didn't matter. The Democrats needed 10 Republicans to cross over and go along to get the 60 votes they need to break a filibuster. But not one Republican voted in favor of even allowing debate on the legislation. Put another way, all 50 Republican senators voted no. While states are back home working hard to suppress the vote, or certain votes, should we say, there's not a Republican in the Senate who wants to even allow a debate on this topic. An angry majority leader spoke moments after the vote was announced.
Senate Republicans have signed their names in the ledger of history alongside Donald Trump, the big lie, and voter suppression. Today, every single Democratic senator stood together in the fight to protect the right to vote in America. The Republican leader uses the language and the logic of the Southern senators in the 60s who defended states' rights. This vote, I'm ashamed to say, is further evidence that voter suppression has become part of the official platform of the Republican Party.
In an unusual move, Vice President Harris presided over the Senate during tonight's vote. Afterwards, she vowed Democrats will continue pushing for federal voting rights legislation.
When we're talking about the right to vote, it is not a Republican concern or a Democratic concern. It is an American concern. This is about the American people's right to vote, unfettered. It is about their access to the right to vote in a meaningful way. Because nobody is debating, I don't believe, whether all Americans have the right to vote. The bottom line is that the President and I are very clear. We support S1. We support the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And the fight is not over.
Since January of this year, just since January, at least 14 states have enacted 22 new laws that restrict access to voting. And right now, there are at least 61 bills with restrictive provisions moving through 18 other state legislatures. Yet Senate Republicans maintain, as was evident in tonight's vote, that there's no reason for the federal government to step in here.
There is no effort in any state in America to suppress votes based upon suppression of minority participation. What this is really about is an effort for the federal government to take over the way we conduct elections in this country. It is a solution in search of a problem. Regardless of what may be happening in some state, there's no rationale for federal intervention.
The Democrats' only real hope of passing any kind of elections overhaul now seems to hang on a long-shot bid to eliminate the filibuster. Tonight, the president issued a statement that read in part, quote, "Unfortunately, a Democratic stand to protect our democracy met a solid Republican wall of opposition. It was the suppression of a bill to end voter suppression, another attack on voting rights that is sadly not unprecedented." So, Sam, indeed, I'd like to begin with you, and I'd like to play this for you and our audience. We'll discuss on the other side. This is Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah tonight.
This bill was written in hell by the devil himself. This bill wouldn't make it easier to vote. This would make it easier to vote illegally. This is the Corrupt Politicians Act. If there's any chance this becomes law, it would be devastating for the country. This would be bad for everyone other than Democratic political incumbents.
So, Sam, how's bipartisanship going? And if that was meant for outreach for the Democratic Party, I think the senator has to work on his communication skills.
First and foremost, I don't think the devil wrote the bill. I think that's hyperbole. A bill was written by a number of Democratic lawmakers. It was amended, although that was never brought to a vote, by Joe Manchin to include at least one very Republican-oriented idea, which was a version of voter identification. Manchin's provision would have said you had to bring something akin to a utility bill in order to vote. So I think it's fair to say that Democrats did try to move a little bit in the Republican direction in order to win the votes, but really there was never a chance that they would. This was, I don't want to call it a messaging exercise, that sort of diminishes it. This was an exercise in showing where the cards were, essentially. This was the Democrats saying, look, we have 50 votes in our caucus. We want to move this bill. We notice what's going on in the state houses around the country. Let's see what Republicans have to say in response. And what the Republicans said in response was not just what Mike Lee said on Fox News tonight, but a resounding no to consideration of this debate. The big question now, Brian, is where do we go from here? What other cards does Biden have to play? What other maneuvers does the White House have? Our reporters have talked to White House officials about this. They concede there's not much they can do, though they're looking for different avenues, whether it's consulting with state House Democrats or leaning on corporate America to do essentially what they did in Georgia, which was apply pressure to lawmakers in the states to not go down this path. Neither of those options are particularly fruitful. So the White House is kind of stuck.
Jonathan Lemire, Stein just tossed you the ball. Pick it up and run with it. Where do we go from here?
Well, Brian, I keep it as a personal policy not to agree with Sam Stein very often, but he is largely right about all of this. The administration does feel like their hands are relatively tied. We should expect more public pressure from the White House. An aide signaled to us earlier today, soon after this bill's defeat in the Senate, that we'd be hearing more from the president on this, and his statement backed that up, that we should expect him to have not just public comments, but perhaps an event that's still being put together on this next week. We did hear from the vice president sort of speaking, let's be candid, she's speaking powerfully about the need to protect the right to vote. When her remarks earlier today after she presided in the Senate, but they're short of something really significant at the state level. Their only move here would indeed be to embark on some sort of filibuster reform. But the problem is there aren't too many Democrats who are willing to do that, or at least not enough. Joe Manchin, of course, is the leading figure of this, but he's far from alone. Kirsten Sinema, another, she wrote in the Washington Post an op-ed just the other day saying it's not something she's supported. And we also know that there are some other Democratic senators who privately agree with them, but are happy to let them be the public face of this opposition. So short of that, this is going to be potentially a real disappointment for the Democrats and for Biden himself, who has said repeatedly this is a lifelong mission of his to expand the access to the franchise, that he would do anything it would require to defend this, to expand the voting rights. This is an existential threat against democracy. It's part of his larger picture to prove that democracies still work against autocracies globally. It's harder sell if you can't say that their democracies are protecting the right to vote at home. So this is a legislative agenda that is quite full right now, but this is something that, though a huge priority for Democrats, may not be something that they can actually enact anytime soon without some sort of sweeping 11th hour change.
Cynthia, my friend, over to you. I don't say it often, but we need a lawyer. What is your level of fear for our country and a free and fair election if we don't have a federal remedy, something new where voter suppression is concerned?
Well, I'm pretty scared about it. I live in Florida where just about anything goes these days with our governor. So I'm hoping very much that we'll figure out a way to get some of these bills passed, and particularly anything having to do with protecting this minority vote, because it looks like the Republicans will do almost anything to figure out a way to make it impossible for people to vote if they don't have just the right ID, or if they move, or if they do anything. So I am hoping that we can come to some agreement with Manchin and Sinema. It just doesn't seem very likely to me.
It is Wednesday, the 23rd of June of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Will no one rid us of these meddlesome Opus Dei bishops? No one? Come on, Pope. You got Pope. You got to do it, Mr. Pope. Papa, do something. I can't believe that these guys are getting away with what they're getting away with, but they've been getting away with it since Vatican I. Yeah, Opus Dei was in retaliation to Vatican I. They couldn't even wait to Vatican II. Couldn't even wait for the first guitar mass. They had to, say, hey, we're Nazis, and we're not going to allow you to do shit. What? You speak like that? Yeah. Because Opus Dei, there's nothing contemplative about their practice. There's no tradition in the Catholic sense of tradition. Unless you want to say that there was some precedent about Pius being the Nazi Pope. So they had to array their considerable might against this terrible communization of the Catholic Church. Oh, my God. Yeah, well. I wonder if those same bishops that we're speaking about, the American bishops, the Opus Dei bishops, the Secret Service had to pay to protect Trump at his resorts and golf courses. I wonder if the Opus Dei bishops had to pay to give Trump communion. And the guy's not even baptized a Catholic. How does that work? Well, because they not only believe that God's emissary is Trump, God's emissary on earth, I don't think that they believe in that kind of stuff. It's all about power and money. And, probably they know the truth about the whole Catholic Church. It was fabricated out of whole cloth, and they called it the Roman collar. Okay. Tax-exempt status. I know that Joe, if Joe was ever going to involve himself in certain aspects of our government, it would probably, in investigations, not government. Of course, he's the president. But involve himself in DOJ investigations and such, the only thing that he would involve himself in is stopping investigation and taking away the tax-exempt status. Well, I guess that'd have to be the IRS. But regardless, he would put a stop to it because it would be unseemly. It's unseemly. It looks like I'm going after my opponents. Well, I don't know. Maybe you should. And Merrick Garland, what's up with that? Now, maybe he's being close to the vest. He's not going to divulge the interior investigations that are ongoing in the DOJ because you don't let the subjects of your investigation know that you care enough to, investigate their crimes. So it looks like Garland is, if I start investigating the DOJ, I might not have anybody left. And that might be true, too. And they'll have to have a massive recruiting effort to be able to fill the whole of the department. And that's massive. And I will say it's needed. Maybe that's why I just don't know. Well, I have my suspicions. Why am I talking about it? Anyway, Garland was a judge, not necessarily of a prosecutorial mind. So I'm just curious if that has something to do with it. Is it something that's lacking for the position? Because there are certainly criminals within the DOJ, and they need to be rooted out. If you give a rat a cookie after they've been eating cookies with no problem all this time, you know they're going to have some sort of scam to, steal a whole dairy for a glass of milk. You cannot let this corruption go on. And now we're hearing the rumblings of the institutional aspects, that the institutions sometimes are even more important than the institution itself. And what's the institution itself? Democracy. We are now hearing rumblings that the DOJ could defend Trump in an insurrection claim, charged with insurrection, just like they could defend him against allegations of rape. Are we going to allow that? Come on, Merrick. See, those guys get Barr and Mitchell. You know, what's up? Jeez. I think we need a cop, okay? And I know a senator who's running for governor against DeSantis. She's a cop. Speaking of DeSantis, he just signed into law that all university and college students, faculty, and administrators must reveal their political inclinations and leanings to, quote, promote diversity. Of course, there was a small disclaimer that said, oh, no, we won't fire any faculty if your political ideology is, or ideology is, not with ours. Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to root out every bit of actual history. This is what authoritarian governments do. And Florida is a test tube for DeSantis because he has presidential aspirations. Can you believe that? That guy. Of course, it's all part of a whole. There's been an anti-intellectualism streak in America since its inception. This is just the furtherance of it, except it is on steroids. Human growth hormone. They're going to have kidney failure if they're not careful. I'm telling you. So it's up to the rest of us who are organic and natural in our approach to democracy. And for some reason, that means that we're terrible because, we want equality, due process for all. What a terrible thing. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy? Well, Brian Williams and crew broke it down at the top about how the GOP had to vote down even discussing the voting rights bill because it was written by the devil. Mike Lee said that. Yeah, Mike Lee. Remember when there was this notion that we were not supposed to have religion as a test? No religious tests to be able to run for office. No religious tests to pass a bill. And look where we are. Makes the Protestant and Catholic conflicts of the 100 Years' War seem, nothing. Well, actually, I'm exaggerating because the 100 Years' War between the Protestants and Catholics were quite brutal. Bloody. And I know that the other side wants that. They are pushing for it. They keep punching us in the chest until we finally raise our hand, and then they will scream bloody murder. They do it every time. It's what bullies do. But you know what? You got to stand up to the bully. You can't give the bully a cookie because then they're just going to want a glass of milk and more cookies. Okay, on the rest of the menu, deaths among Medicare patients in nursing homes soared by 32% last year. What was happening last year? With two devastating spikes 8 months apart. 15 GOP governors urged the immediate release of Census redistricting data, saying further delays would hurt their efforts to redraw congressional and legislative districts in their favor before the election. I know that's wordy, but that's exactly what they're trying to do. And the U.S. government will review its own dark history of Native American boarding schools. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the New York Times reported that the Saudis who killed journalist Jamal Khashoggi received their paramilitary training in the United States. And Britain's government communications headquarters spy agency installed a giant multicolored artwork to celebrate codebreaker and mathematician Alan Turing. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And I know many of you have heard this before, but I feel compelled to repeat it. If you could afford to become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio by sending us the funds of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could send those funds to us once a month, we stretch those dollars with dollars we have pooled, and we stretch them beyond compare even on the quantum level, I can assure you. I can. I don't know how, but I can. Anyway, we stretch those dollars, and the result is that we are able to then pay our bills. And we've been doing that for 10 years of continuous 24/7, 365 resistance radio, because this Nazi takeover of America started a long time ago, and we will not allow it to come to fruition. We will not. The great experiment is such that, hey, goodness has to win. That's what the experiment is for. Wait a second. Is that how science works? Well, anyway, your monthly contribution allows us to pay those bills, fly under the radar, and continue this resistance against the Nazi takeover of America. And therefore, we fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended. Oh, so many years ago. Anyway, all kidding aside, thank you for your generosity, and thank you for considering sustaining us, because we can't let them do what they're doing without a fight. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so by going to simply at Netroots Radio. How simple is that? Tom takes care of that, and we thank Tom for doing so. And thank Kelly and Tom for doing even more than just those assigned tasks. Were they assigned? Well, anyway, they take care of it. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. You know, you can find me there on Daily Codes too anyway. But since I post those show notes and links on Twitter and other social media platforms, and you know who they are, you could follow me on Twitter, and then you get the show notes and links, and that's where the real reportage is. Okay. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West. And please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Because not everybody can listen to the live part. Nope, not everybody. Oh, I guess I should have mentioned in my rambling rant at the top there, we have had some really brutal weather here in terms of heat. And already the fires are starting. And it's, I don't know if, I use the term scary in a rhetorical sense. It's not scary. It just kind of pisses me off. On the other hand, no one wants to get burned up alive. I mean, you don't. It's just not something that you would like to do. And I would like to avoid that. So, I was actually quite appalled when I saw the 4th of July fireworks tents being constructed all over the region. And we had just had a 60-acre, thank goodness it was only 60 acres, but a wildfire, because it was in wild land, that was stopped a little more than a mile from town. And I just don't understand how people can have sparklers, even, let alone all the other stuff. I mean, we're going to have problems with illegal fireworks because people where I'm at, where there's tinder dry hills just beyond people's backyards, they shoot fireworks in the air in the middle of the street. In the air. So, of course, there's idiots that say, oh, you're just a coward. You're trying to tell people what to do. Why do I have to give up my traditions of celebrating the holidays because people are just trying to tell other people what to do? There was a whole town called Talent, Oregon, just right on I-5. Completely brought to the ground, razed by the wildfires last season. People died, and people are still displaced, and there's a heartfelt outpouring for those refugees from Talent. And these, by and large, they're Make America Great Again types. I call them maggots for short. Who feel that everything has to be contentious. And I love the libertarian argument that comes with it. If somebody starts a fire, they'll be sued. When you've lost 40 plus years of your life, say, in mementos, etc., no amount of monetary remuneration is going to pay that back. Give me a break. And anyway, I guess this is the difference between the maggot mind and reasonable civic-minded Americans. You mitigate the disaster before it happens. You try to make sure that disaster doesn't happen. Of course, then, we have to have the arguments of no one's going to tell me to make a fire barrier by making sure this tinder dry grass that's on my property is cut down. Property being in some cases acres and acres. So you're not going to take care of the fire starting material on your property that's going to endanger others. That's why we have laws. And of course, those people don't like laws because they don't want to be told what to do. And trust me, just like in every Twilight Zone episode you saw that addressed this issue, as soon as the disaster happens, the ones that called everybody else cowards and sheeple and, oh, you just want the commie socialist Democrats to run things, every single one of them will be crying because they lost their property, their pets, and maybe grandma and grandpa too. And they'll be asking for some water, and where can I get a plate of food? Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and this is quite a story. It's by Ricardo Alfonso Zaldivar out of the Associated Press. Now, there's been a lot of arguments here, even because there's still COVID denialists. There's vaccine denialists, anti-vaxxers. I will not be a test subject for the vaccine, right? There's arguments that the confirmed deaths by COVID are manipulated, and they're much larger than than what is being reported. Or, I'm sorry, that what's being reported is much larger than what is in fact. Because their argument is that, if someone dies of like an ulcerated lung, they say that he died from COVID. Even though the person would not have had an ulcerated lung except for having COVID. But, there you go. So this article, though, is not microscoped down on just COVID deaths. It's tracking all deaths in nursing homes across the country. And this is quite a story. Deaths among Medicare patients in nursing homes soared by 32% last year, with two devastating spikes 8 months apart. A government watchdog reported yesterday, in the most comprehensive look yet at the ravages of COVID-19 among its most vulnerable victims. The report from the Inspector General of the Department of Health and Human Services found that about 4 in 10 Medicare recipients in nursing homes had or likely had COVID-19 in 2020, and that deaths overall jumped by 169,291 from the previous year before the coronavirus appeared. We knew that this was going to be bad, but I don't think even those of us who work in this area thought it was going to be this bad, said Harvard Health Policy Professor David Grabowski, a nationally recognized expert on long-term care who reviewed the report for the AP. This was not individuals who were going to die anyway, Grabowski added. We are talking about a really big number of excess deaths. Investigators used a generally accepted method of estimating excess deaths in a group of people after a calamitous event. It did not involve examining individual death certificates of Medicare patients, but comparing overall deaths among those in nursing homes to levels recorded the previous year. The technique was used to estimate deaths in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria and New York City after the first coronavirus surge last spring. It does not attribute a cause of death, but is seen as a barometer of impact. Death rates were higher in every month last year when compared with 2019. The report documented 2 spikes with particular implications for government policy and for protecting the most vulnerable in future outbreaks of life-threatening illnesses. In April of last year, a total of 81,484 Medicare patients in nursing homes died. Then 8 months later, after lockdowns and frantic efforts to expand testing, but before vaccines became widely available, nursing home patients accounted for a staggering 74,299 deaths in December. Responding to the report, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services said that nearly 80% of nursing home residents and more than 55% of staff are now vaccinated, and the agency is working to protect health and safety. Sands of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. 15 Republican governors sent a letter to the U.S. Department of Commerce urging that the U.S. Census Bureau release redistricting data as soon as possible, saying further delays would hurt efforts to redraw congressional and legislative districts. Oh, you mean in your favor? Before the upcoming elections? The letter addressed to Commerce Secretary Gina M. Raimondo said the governors recognize the difficulties associated with completing the decennial census during the coronavirus pandemic, which has postponed release of the data until mid-August. Oh, and they said that with a straight face. But the letter also said the ongoing delay put states in a nearly impossible situation to redraw lines prior to the 2022 election cycle. Oh, really? The U.S. House and state legislative districts must be redrawn. They must. The governors asked that the data be released this month or as soon as possible. You'll wait till August, and you'll love it. The census is completed every 10 years and is essential for determining population numbers and other key demographics. Census data is used for redrawing congressional and legislative districts, determining how many congressional seats each state gets, and deciding how $1.5 trillion in federal spending is distributed each year. Montoya Bryan of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The federal government will investigate its past oversight of Native American boarding schools and to work to uncover the truth and the loss of human life and the lasting consequences of policies that over the decades forced hundreds of thousands of children from their families and communities, U.S. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland announced yesterday, Tuesday. Oh, you mean it was a family separation policy? The unprecedented work will include compiling and reviewing records to identify past boarding schools, locate known and possible burial sites at or near those schools, and uncover the names and tribal affiliations of the students, she said. To address the intergenerational impact of Indian boarding schools and to promote spiritual and emotional healing in our communities, we must shed light on the unspoken traumas of the past, no matter how hard it will be, Haaland said. A member of New Mexico's Laguna Pueblo and the first Native American to serve as a cabinet secretary, Haaland outlined the initiative while addressing members of the National Congress of American Indians during the group's mid-year conference. She said the process will be long, difficult, and painful, and will not undo the heartbreak and loss endured by many families. Starting with the Indian Civilization Act of 1819, the U.S. enacted laws and policies to establish and support Indian boarding schools across the nation. For over 150 years, indigenous children were taken from their families and forced into boarding schools that focused on assimilation. Well, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com. Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Desolation Row. In the background, in one scene in the new film Holler, a news report fades foreground long enough for us to hear the unforgettable voice of a certain ex-president uttering the words jobs, 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 which is exactly what there are a few of in Jackson, Ohio, the setting for the film and the hometown to first-time feature director Nicole Rigel. Our protagonist here is Jessica Barden's character, Ruth, a high school senior who we first meet racing down a dark alley with her brother Blaze, Gus Halper, with bags of cans to sell to a local acquaintance, Scrapper Hark, played by The Walking Dead's Emilio Austin. Dissatisfied with their take on that, the two join Hark's crew, soon realizing that his business is mostly stripping the metal bones, especially copper, from the area's former factories. Ruth is a promising student and finds out early on that she's been accepted at college thanks to an application sent in, unbeknownst to her, by her brother, who sees a way out for her. An unfortunate default statement, though, concerning his own future. Ruth, as the film progresses through scenes of her home decorated in eviction notices, to visits to her mom at the county jail, to harrowing scenes of the crew's wee hours metal harvesting, is torn between local and family loyalties and the way out. The grittiness on display here is evocative of director Rigel's lived experience, enhanced by the shooting in Super 16, and all tied together by Barden's stunning performance. In the same way as Nomadland, Hillbilly Elegy, or Winter's Bone, the oppressive and ominous specter of a hollowed-out America is almost another character. Watching Holler, as with the best of this kind of quasi-political filmmaking, you realize that this is the lived experience of far too many, and that has consequences. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Hi, and welcome to COVID Quickly, a Scientific American podcast series.
This is your fast track update on the COVID pandemic. We bring you up to speed on the science behind the most urgent questions about the virus and the disease. We demystify the research and help you understand what it really means.
I'm Tanya Lewis.
I'm Josh Fishman.
And we're Scientific American's senior health editors. Today we're talking about the danger of the Delta variant.
And the patchwork vaccine effort around the world.
And lottery tickets or beers for a shot in the U.S. The latest virus variant to grab headlines is called Delta. Why are scientists particularly concerned about it, Josh?
Because it's more transmissible and it seems to be putting more people in the hospital, Tanya. And it's on the rise all around the globe. Delta was first spotted in India and spread quickly to 74 countries. In England, it accounts for 90% of new cases, taking over from the version called Alpha. It's got a bunch of mutations that seem to help it get inside human cells and evade antibodies that hunt for it. Researchers at Public Health England found the chances of people passing Delta around their households were 64% higher than with Alpha. That's a big jump.
England had started opening up more recently, too. Couldn't that have also led to more infections, in addition to some feature of the variant itself?
Yeah, there's stuff going on that can heighten the Delta numbers. People started traveling and businesses and restaurants were opening. But the bottom line here is there's a steep climb in Delta cases. And Delta appears to send twice as many people to the hospital as Alpha does. That's severe illness, such as being unable to breathe. A lot of these people are younger, under age 30, according to research in the medical journal The Lancet. Now, this isn't all doom. Even with Delta, vaccines keep people safe. Health records in Scotland show 2 shots of the Pfizer vaccine block Delta infection in 80% of people. Both the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines kept practically everyone who got those shots out of the hospital, early data from England show. So what's this all mean? Already in the US, Delta accounts for 10% of infections. So it's coming. With summer reopenings and people mingling, unvaccinated people could get Delta during the next few months, setting up an ugly fall. Getting vaccinated, the numbers show, is the best route to keeping infections down and getting life closer to normal. More than half of the adult U.S. population has been fully vaccinated now. What's the situation like in other countries?
So far, most of the vaccines have gone to the wealthiest countries. In many low-income countries, less than 1% of people have gotten a single dose. An international effort called COVAX was supposed to fill this gap. Its goal was to distribute 2 billion vaccine doses by the end of this year. But as freelance contributor Sarah Reardon reported for us earlier this week, COVAX is far behind where it needs to be. A big part of the problem is that wealthy countries bought up all the vaccine doses before many vaccines were even approved. COVAX says part of the delay was because it lacked enough funding early on to secure those doses. Even when vaccines are available, they may be perceived as less effective or less safe than the vaccines available in richer countries. For example, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, 1.7 million doses of AstraZeneca's vaccine sat idle while European drug regulators weighed the risk of blood clots. By the time the vaccines were cleared for use, they were about to expire, and many were shipped elsewhere. Even if COVAX reaches its goal, it would still only vaccinate 20% of every country's population. So many countries have been forced to negotiate their own deals with vaccine makers as well. There is some good news. Wealthy countries recently pledged a total of 870 million vaccines to COVAX, half of them by the end of this year. But that still leaves a long way to go.
Clearly, vaccination is a life-saving idea. But in the U.S., it's been tough persuading some people to get these shots. Now, states and businesses are using creative lures to get folks to roll up their sleeves, and you just wrote about some free stuff people can get. What kinds of rewards?
Well, several states, including Ohio, California, and New York, have created lotteries with prizes ranging up to $1 million or more for people who've gotten vaccinated. Some states are also offering vaccinated teenagers the chance to win scholarships to state colleges and universities. Other states are trying more unusual approaches. West Virginia is raffling off rifles and shotguns. Washington State is letting marijuana dispensaries give out free joints. And New Jersey and Connecticut have been giving away free beer. These offers may not last forever, so if you've just gotten vaccinated, check for updates. These kinds of incentives work, experts say. A survey of unvaccinated people found that offering a cash reward or saying they wouldn't need to wear masks anymore made people more likely to say they would get a shot. And if the end result means more vaccinated people, that's a good thing. Now you're up to speed. Thanks for joining us.
Come back in 2 weeks for the next episode of COVID Quickly. And check out SciAm.com for updated and in-depth COVID news.
A social distancing tip.
While the CDC urges you to avoid close contact, like hugging or shaking hands, there are other non-physical ways to say hello. Wave, wink, use sign language, salute, smile, give the peace sign, throw up an air high five, do jazz hands. Remember, stay a minimum of 6 feet or 2 arms length away from others, and stay home if you can. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day the despised Taft-Hartley Act became law. It was a direct retaliatory response to the 1946 post-war strike wave, where millions walked off the job after waiting years for basic demands. The labor movement mobilized against the slave labor bill through numerous rallies. The AFL joined the CIO in threatening 24-hour strikes across across whole industries in protest as the bill wound its way through Congress. 11,000 soft coal miners in Pennsylvania walked out in a spontaneous protest strike earlier in the month. The bill passed over the veto of President Harry S. Truman, who would invoke it a dozen times over the course of his presidency. Many union leaders hailed Truman as a friend of labor for his 11th hour veto. Labor Party advocates were incensed that of the 219 congressional Democrats, 126 voted in favor of the bill. Practically overnight, the labor movement had been pushed back 25 years. Taft-Hartley was nothing short of disastrous for the American labor movement. With the stroke of a pen, the act criminalized many of the actions key to historic union victories in the 30s and 40s. Jurisdictional strikes, secondary boycotts, solidarity strikes, closed shops, and mass picketing were just a few of the most basic trade union activities now outlawed. The act helped fire the first shots of the McCarthy Red Scare by mandating that union officers file non-communist affidavits with the government, which was later found to be unconstitutional. The act also provided the ammunition needed to strangle strikes by empowering the president to easily acquire strike-breaking injunctions. And it allowed for the rapid growth of right-to-work laws at the state level. And because of Taft-Hartley, the union movement has suffered ever since.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 67 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high of only 90 to 92 because we were bumping 100 the last several days. Got quite humid yesterday. Had a few thunderstorms roll through, a smattering of rain, not enough to really water our garden here in the mothership area of Rogue River. And expecting somewhat of the same today. It looks like we'll have mostly sunny skies. A stray afternoon thunderstorm is possible. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Overnight lows in the mid to low 60s. A stray shower or thunderstorm is possible early, but mostly clear. And winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Highs will inch up a tad tomorrow with being around 94 to 95. Sunshine and some clouds, and another stray afternoon thunderstorm is possible. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. The updated totals from the weekend of confirmed cases of coronavirus in Jackson County in the southern part of Oregon have spiked once again and now are at 11,549, almost 100 over the weekend totals from last Friday. Deceased, though, remain at 146 confirmed. Well, we'll see about that too, won't we? Grass pollen remains very high here at the mothership in Rogue River proper. The air quality index is in the high range of good at 44 parts per million, and the daytime UV index is very high at 9. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.94 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at a sticky 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. London is 69 and sunny. Paris is 61 and cloudy. Rome is 83 and sunny. Oh, well, actually, most of the interior of Europe has been baking. So to see 61 and cloudy in France, they had been bumping almost to triple digits. And I got to tell you, there's not a whole lot of air conditioning in Paris. Kyiv is 90 degrees and fair. Kabul is 80 and fair. Hong Kong is 76 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 60 degrees and mostly cloudy. And New York is a pleasant 70 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Whenever bone saws are involved, it's always prudent to remain anonymous, and so anonymous staff at Reuters bring us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Four Saudis who participated in the 2018 killing of the Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi received paramilitary training in the United States the previous year under a contract approved by the State Department, the New York Times reported. The training was provided by Tier 1 Group, which is owned by the private equity firm Cerberus Capital Management and was defensive in nature and devised to protect Saudi leaders. And I guess they did a pretty good job now, didn't they? Cerberus did not immediately respond to a request for comment from Reuters because why would they? In response to the Times report, State Department spokesman Ned Price said under the law, the department cannot comment on any of the licensed defense export licensing activity alleged in media reporting. Price also said U.S. policy towards Saudi Arabia will prioritize the rule of law and respect for human rights. Cerberus senior executive Louis Bremer confirmed his company's role in the training of four members of the Khashoggi kill team last year in written answers to questions from members of Congress as part of his nomination for a senior Pentagon job in former Trump's administration, according to the Times. He's not former Trump, but former president. But the lawmakers never received the answers because the Trump administration does not appear to have sent them to Congress before withdrawing Bremer's nomination. And Bremer had provided the Times with the documents. Bremer said the U.S. State Department and other government agencies are responsible for vetting foreign forces trained on U.S. soil.
Je te donne, c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer. Mes automnes, quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Reuters staff brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Britain's GCHQ Spice Agency has installed a giant multicolored artwork to celebrate codebreaker and mathematician Alan Turing, who helped turn the tide of World War II against Nazi Germany but was persecuted for being gay. The 33-foot by 33-foot artwork in the center of the agency's donut-shaped headquarters depicts Turing inside the wheels of the bomb, the codebreaker machine that he designed. Considered the father of modern computing, Turing led a team that cracked the Nazis' naval Enigma code for British spies, a breakthrough dramatized in the 2014 thriller The Imitation Game. But he pleaded guilty to gross indecency in 1952 after a sexual relationship with another man, forced to have hormonal injections, and then killed himself 2 years later at the age of 41 by eating an apple laced with cyanide. The installation was unveiled on his birthday as a new 50-pound note featuring Turing entered circulation. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on. And we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grist Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte coère. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.